All right, so I am going to start this video so you guys can have this at home if you want to study. Same questions that we went over just on the game in class. So to evaluate, we want to plug in the values. So I have the absolute value of 1 minus 7 times b. The b value I'm going to put in parentheses, close absolute value, minus the absolute value of a. The absolute value of a, well, a is negative 2. I'm going to put a negative 2 right in there. And the b value is 4, so I'm going to put a 4 right in here. We're going to simplify the inside of the absolute values. So 7 times 4 is 28, or you could call it negative 7 times 4 is negative 28. Either way, on the inside you have 1 minus 28. It's still inside these absolute values, so I'm going to put the absolute values right there. 1 take away 28 is negative 27. Negative 27, and it's still inside of the absolute values. Now, once I do the absolute value of negative 27, I will get a positive 27. Now, a lot of times students see this minus minus. They want to change the plus plus. That would be incorrect. Why is that? Because you could actually do the absolute value of negative 2. That's positive 2. And then the minus sign has to come down. So you really have a minus 2 at the end of this 27. So let me bring it all the way down over here. Minus 2. So we have 27 take away 2. Final answer is 25. So there's going to be 2 of those where you have to take values, plug them in. It's not an equation. You're not doing a positive or negative situation. You're just plugging in your values and you're doing the math. If you use a calculator, I still need to see the work. All right. So you could use a calculator if you want, but I need to see all the work that you do to get to the answer 25 on the test tomorrow. So this was question 2 on the game, on the review game that we did. There's going to be 2 of these types of questions solving absolute value equations. So step 1 is to isolate the absolute value. So we would add 13 first to both sides, rewrite the whole thing. And then after that, your final step to isolating would be to get rid of this multiplication of 4 by doing the opposite, dividing by 4. So divide by 4, cancels out. What you do to one side, you must do to the other. Your new absolute value equation is the absolute value of 2y minus 9, close absolute value, is equal to 1. Now from there, now that it's isolated, you have to do a positive and negative situation. So pos, neg, squiggly line. The positive situation is writing it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. See, it's the same exact thing, no absolute values. The negative situation is the same thing, but we need to flip the equal sign, which will still say equal, and change the sign of the right side. So we'll end up with 2y minus 9 equals negative 1. And of course, we're going to solve both. On the left equation, we have a plus 9, plus 9. We will have a 2y equaling 10. Final step would be to divide by 2. Divide by 2. We will get an answer y equals 5. That's one answer. And the other one, same deal. Let's subtract or add 9 to get rid of that minus 9. We have 2y equaling 8. Final step will be to divide by 2. Divide by 2. Y will equal 4. So you're supposed to test your solutions, and I would test it right into the isolated absolute value equation. It's a little easier to do than doing all this math up here and plugging it in. So 5 right here, 2 times 5 is 10. 10 take away 9 is 1. And yes, the absolute value of 1 is 1. So this one definitely works. Over here, plug in 4. 2 times 4 is 8. 8 minus 9 is negative 1. And the absolute value of negative 1 is also 1. So both of them work. So you're going to have to write both answers on your answer column on the test. Now this is not an inequality, so you're not going to use the word or between them. You're just going to put y equals 5, y equals 4, or you could put 5 and 4, whatever. Okay. Let's move on. This question 3 from the game, which there's 2 of these types of questions solving inequalities, right? Regular inequalities. So you want to get x by itself on one side. I would add 4x to move the x to the left side. My new equation, or my new inequality, is 5 minus 3x. I don't flip it, I keep it, equals 50, not equals, it's greater than or equal to 50. Next step would be to get rid of that 5 by subtracting 5. Subtracting 5, we end up with negative 3x is greater than or equal to 45. So my final step would be to divide by -3, divide by -3, which means that my final answer is going to be x. I must flip the inequality symbol, and we get 15, -15 as the final answer. So it says solve, then graph. So on the test, I will provide you number lines when I want you to graph. Right here, we could just do a quick sketch. Let's say -15's here, -14's there, -13, and so on and so on. This is going to be a solid dot at -15 going to the left because it says less than. Moving on to question number 4. There's also going to be 2 of these types of questions. So we went from regular inequalities to compound inequalities. The only difference is you don't just have 2 sides, right? This is a regular inequality. This is a compound inequality. So we have the middle that we want to get y by itself, and whatever you do to the middle, you have to do to the 2 outside sides. So to get rid of that -20, you'd go +20. We do to one to the middle, you do to both outside sides, +20 over here, +20 over here. We end up with -32 is less than or equal to 4y, which is less than 28. Final step to get rid of the multiplication of 4 in front of the y would be to divide by 4. And what you do to the middle, you do to both outside sides. We will end up with -8 is less than or equal to y, which is less than 7. So that's your final compound inequality. To graph it, let's do a quick sketch. Let's just put a -8 over here. 0 is somewhere over here. Let's say +7's over here. It's going to be a solid dot at -8. It's going to be an open dot at 7. And since I already know that it's written as a compound inequality from the beginning and my answer is still a compound inequality, my areas are going to be together because the inequalities are written together. So my areas will be together. Just connect those. And even if you were to think it through, you'd still get to that conclusion. Y is less than 7, less than's to the left. Y is greater than or equal to -8. You read it backwards, greater than's to the right. Let's move on to the next one. There's going to be 2 of these guys where the word or is between the 2. You solve both. Let's solve the left one by subtracting 8. Subtracting 8, we'll end up with -3x is less than -3. Final step will be to divide by -3. Divide by -3. So x, since we divided by negative, we have to flip the inequality symbol. Get a 1 right there. So x is greater than 1. Let's do the other one. +13. +13. My new inequality will be -5x is greater than 10. -5x is greater than 10. So final step would be to divide by -5, divide by -5, which gives us a final answer of x is greater than -2. No, less than -2. Sorry, x is less than -2. Now we do need to graph to see if the areas really are apart. That way we keep those answers apart with the word or. So when we graph, x is greater than 1, greater than is that way. And when we graph x is less than -2, here's -2, less than is that way. So they really are apart. So all you have to do is bring down that word or, place it right between the 2, and that's what you write on your answer column. X is greater than 1 or x is less than -2. Now, if they were going in the same direction, right? If they were both going in the same direction, then you got to think whether you want this one or that one to represent your answer. Those special cases. So I might as well touch on this quickly. If you're working on 2 inequalities that has the word or between it, and you end up with, like, let's say you had x is greater than -2 and x is greater than, let's say, 1. So when you graph -2 right there, greater than is that way, and you graph the 1 right there, greater than is that way as well. If there is the word or between it, it does not have to satisfy both. You don't need to represent the overlap piece. You just represent that first inequality, okay, if there's an or between it. So you would not write this whole thing as an answer. You would just write that first one as your answer. Now, if it would have had the word and between it, then you would represent this inequality as your answer because that's where the overlap is at. And implies that both have to work Or implies that one or the other. So whenever it has the word or and they're going in the same direction, use the first inequality that you have, which in this case would be x is greater than negative 2. Okay, so that would be your answer, not this one. This would be your answer in this special case where they're both going in the same direction. So there's going to be 2 of these types of questions on the test tomorrow where you have to solve the absolute value inequality. And step 1 of solving an absolute value equation or inequality is to get the absolute value by itself, to isolate it. So you'd get rid of the 6 first. That would cancel out. What you do to one side, you do to the other side. Your new absolute value equation or inequality is this. Now we still need to get rid of that multiplication of 2 out here in the front. So the way to get rid of something is to do the opposite. The opposite of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. So that cancels out. And what you do to one side, you must do to the other side. And our new absolute value equation, running out of space here, our new absolute value equation will be that absolute value of 7x plus 7, closed absolute value is less than or equal to 7. So from here, once it's isolated, then you have to do the positive and the negative situation. So the positive situation is simply writing it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. So you want to rewrite this whole thing exactly the way it is. Don't change anything. Just erase these absolute values. And the negative situation is the same thing as this guy, but we need to flip the inequality and change the sign of the 7. So it's all going to be the same. It's going to be 7x plus 7, but that less than symbol is going to, less than or equal to is going to change to a greater than or equal to, and that 7 is going to change to a negative 7. Make sense? That's a setup. Now we need to solve both of those. So on the left side, on the positive situation, subtract 7 to both sides. We end up with 7x is less than or equal to 0. And if you divide by 7, 0 divided by 7, 0 divided by any number is 0. So x is less than or equal to 0. Now that's one inequality. Let's do the other. We're going to also subtract 7. We'll end up with 7x is greater than or equal to negative 14. Final step will be divide by 7, divide by 7. We do not change the inequality. It stays the same. We didn't divide by a negative. It stays greater than or equal to negative 2. So we must go to a number line to determine whether we write these answers together or separate, right? If the areas are apart, you just simply put the word or between them, and this will be your whole answer with the word or. If the areas are together, that's when we need to go for a compound inequality. So the best way to do that is to sketch a quick number line. And let's put the value of 0 right here and the value of negative 2 over here. So when we think about this one, x is less than or equal to 0. That's a solid dot. Less than is this way. And when we think about this guy, x is greater than or equal to negative 2. Solid dot greater than is that way. So this is an area that's together, right? So you have solid dot, the areas together. And when it is together, we cannot leave them separate with the word or. We have to actually write it together as a compound inequality. And so if you did sketch your number line, it's really easy to do. All you do is put the x in the middle, the smaller number on the left side, which if you have your number line, the smaller number is already on the left side. So you have a negative 2 right there, and the 0, the greater number on the right side. And you're always going to have the less than symbols, and these are or equal to, because the original ones had the or equal to. So this is your final compound inequality answer for this question. Now, if the areas would have gone apart, then I'd simply put an or right there, and that would be my entire answer. The answer separate with the word or. If they're apart, put the word or. If they're together, you have to put it together as a compound inequality like that. Moving on to the next question. So there's going to be 3 of these guys. This is probably the most significant portion of the test tomorrow, and it's really easy if you know the format. What was the format? It was the absolute value of x minus the midpoint, right? Is either greater than or less than the distance, the distance from the point to the midpoint, right? So let me erase the abbreviation of midpoint. What is the midpoint? It's negative 2, okay? And is this going to be an area that is represented with the greater than symbol or with the less than symbol? Less than symbol, because the areas are together. So it is less than, not less than or equal to, because these are open dots, not solid dots. So just less than, the areas are together. If it would have been apart, you would have put a greater than symbol. And then at the very end, the distance from one point to the midpoint, that's simply 1 unit in this case. So we're just going to put a 1 right there. The only other thing you could do is change the minus minus to plus plus. So here's your final best absolute value inequality. The absolute value of x plus 2 is less than 1. I hope we all understand that. So this one, the absolute value of x minus the midpoint, which is obviously 0, close the absolute value, and these areas are apart. Now what does that mean? It's either going that way, or, right? So we need to put a greater than symbol right there. So we're going to put a greater than symbol. Now they are solid dots, so we need a greater than or equal to. Okay, and then the answer over here, the number over here is going to be the distance from the point to the midpoint. So that would be 2, right? No, wrong. It's not 2. It's actually 14, right? So 14 over here. Now the only other thing you could do to make this look a little bit nicer is to simplify it. So you could say absolute value of x is greater than or equal to 14. Now if you left it like that, if you left it with the x minus 0, I'd still give you full credit. But it's nicer when it's just the absolute value of x is greater than or equal to 14. So on this particular question, you're supposed to isolate the absolute value first, right? Isolate the absolute value. So when you're isolating this absolute value, you go plus 8. Plus 8. We have negative 3 absolute value of x minus 4 is greater than or equal to 24. And now to get rid of the negative 3 that's being multiplied by the absolute value, you're going to divide by negative 3. Now this is an inequality, and when you're dividing by a negative 3, you're going to end up flipping the inequality symbol. It's going to become a less than or equal to negative 8. Now, at this point, I saw everybody do the positive situation and negative situation, and that, that's great. You guys know what you're doing, but that's a big but right there. The but is that this absolute value cannot equal a negative 8, and it can't be less than negative 8. So this is where we have a no solution. No solution. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, nobody got that right, huh? Anyhow. All right, guys, I might as well explain this special case. If I ask you to solve this compound inequality with the word or between it, you would first add 7. Add 7. You'd get negative 4x is greater than, what is that? Negative 52. So you divide by negative 4. Divide by negative 4, flip the sign. And that is, what is that, 13? 14. I think it's 13. 13. Okay, positive 13. And then we go for the other one, add 5. Add 5. 21. You have 3x is less than negative 21. Final step would be to divide by 3. Divide by 3. X is less than negative 7. So this is a special case problem. I do recommend you guys to graph it, because or usually means that the areas are going to go apart. But check this out. When you have a negative 7 here and a positive 13 over here, 0 is somewhere over here in the middle, x is less than negative 7, open dot, lessons to the left. And then x is less than 13, open dot, also to the left. 13. So if it were and, if it would have an and right here, it would be the overlap piece. But because it says or, it could be either or, which I would use this one. Well, you have to use this one.
Wait, wouldn't the overlap piece be the back one? Yes.
So if you had an and, that would be the overlap piece that you want, right?
So it'd be the back one, right?
So it'd be the back one because it's or.
So it'd be 13?
Yeah, it'd be 13. So the correct answer here would be x is less than 13.
Wait, so on and, it would be negative 7?
On and, you would extend this out until you start overlapping, which means the negative 7. With the and is the overlap. But the or is usually the one where it first starts. Okay. So this is the first one going in that direction, so you state that first one going in that direction. Okay. All right, so is that going to be on the test tomorrow? Yeah. Probably not. Okay, I'm just explaining. Maybe extra credit. Maybe.
Oh yeah.
Maybe.
Extra credit.
All right, guys. So hopefully you got something out of that video. All those review questions were the questions that we did in class with the review game around the world. I also want to just show you this breakdown of what the test is specifically going to be. 4 questions from worksheet 1.4, specifically 2 evaluating absolute values and 2 solving absolute value equations. 2 questions from worksheet 1.5, solving and graphing regular inequalities, not compound inequalities. And there's 8 questions from the 3rd section. Why is there so many questions on the 3rd section? Because you really need to know all of this in order to be able to do this. So the 8 questions, 1.6, that's the biggest section, or the most questions that I get from section 1.6. And I could select from the homework or from the notes themselves. So specifically, there's 3 questions on solving compound inequalities, 2 questions on solving absolute value inequalities, and 3 questions that you have to graph and must write the absolute value inequality. Anyhow, please study, comment, hit the like button. Thank you.